Ready? So my name is Maritza, and I am doing my reputation speech on Brian Medina. Brian. So his major claim was that America's privatization of prisons severely affect the living conditions of prisoners. The advocate needs to give more further reference to support his major claim, although I will agree that the private prisons do affect prisoners overall. Not all of my advocate's given claims are true. His three major claims were: 1, America's incredibly large prison population; 2, the general public's neglect of prisons conditions and inmate rights lead to business-like prisons; and 3, private companies provide inadequate basic services to prisons. So my response to his first claim is that the advocate brings up three major points of his first claim, which some are based on correct data and some aren't. He states that pay and staff ratio in private prisons were lower than public prisons. According to the evidence that I found, which is based on a study done by Curtis Blakely from the University of South Alabama and Vic Bumpus, the private sector paid new officers approximately $5,000 less than the public sector, while offering less advancement in salary, with a difference in the maximum salary of $14,000. Thus, private prisons do pay their employees a lot less than public prisons. However, the advocate's first claim was not pertinent to the information he provided for it. It would have been a good idea to give ratios and numbers of staff pay and the differences between the amount of inmate in a private and public prison. Also, when the given information about 2 staff officers who were responsible for 128 to 256 juveniles, he gives no data on why it was incorrect to have only 2 staff members supervising the juveniles. The advocate assumed that it was wrong to have 2 officers for 128 to 256 juvenile inmates in a private facility, but he gave no reason on why it was unjust or unsafe. There is no backup for this claim. So I would like to add that in the same article that was done by Bumpus and Blakely, they stated that the private sector reported a stay of 11 months versus 28 months, which makes it a large difference of 16 months. In the words of Bumpus and Blakely, this proof makes it consistent with differences in classification where higher security designation are often tied to offense and seriousness. I would like to add that this article also stated that the private sector commonly operated at 82% as opposed to the public being 113% capacity of inmates. This also gives proof that there is a higher accountability on private prisons and their inmates as opposed to public prisons. Therefore, although the advocate did not supply enough data to back up his claim or on higher crime rates in private prisons, as opposed to public prison, he was correct in stating that the crime rate is higher in private prisons. Thus, the data of Bumpus and Blakely support his claim for higher crime rate in private prisons. My response to the secondary claim, which was the general public neglect of prison conditions and inmate rights lead to business-like prisons. So he gave an example about the GEO Group and the CCA, which stands for the Correction Corporation of America, which are the top leading largest private prison companies. The advocate states that CCA and GEO Groups cater to their investors. The statement is true. Both the CCA and GEO Groups benefit from having more prisoners behind bars because they build more revenue. According to the CCA 2010 annual report, 50% of their revenue came primarily from the state contracts JPI. They state that states hire private firms to provide such services as medical and mental health treatment, drug treatment, education, staff training, and vocational training and counseling. So the evidence given by the advocate were not enough to prove the point he was trying to make, stating that the CCA and the GEO Group cater to investors does not give any underlying evidence of how exactly these investors benefit from catering to their investors. Ratios, percentages, and statistical data would have been helpful. Although the reason of the advocate was on the right track, he could have given a stronger argument by providing the evidence of the private prisons. So the advocate claimed that the CCA promises high recidivism, sorry if I butcher that, with their inmates, and although this may be true, there is no given evidence of this occurring. According to my evidence, Jennifer and Alan Beck who conducted a study on trends in the U.S. correctional populations. They found that the reason inmates are spending more time in jail is because tougher sentencing acted to keep criminals behind bars longer, preventing them from committing more crime in the community. Some of these sentencing policies are practices like the 3-strike law, mandatory sentencing, and a widespread abandonment of parole in the state and federal system. Thus, although inmates are staying in jail longer, it may be because of such laws, not because private jails are purposely increasing recidivism. So my response to his last claim, which is the advocate states that companies provide inadequate basic services to prison like healthcare and food services. According to the proof and data I found, it states otherwise in some areas. So food portioning and food service provided to inmates was unsafe according to the advocate. Although it may be difficult to track exactly what is really going on in the kitchens of private prisons, there have been reported evidence on how poor food qualities are hindering the health of inmates. According to David Ruture, a journalist for Prison Legal News, in 2008 there were 2 reports of food poisoning from a food service company called Aramark that fed prisoners a chili sauce when it had not been refrigerated and kept in safe conditions. Florida's Santa Rosa Correctional Institute had 270 ill prisoners, and Colorado's Larimer County Detention Center had 50 ill prisoners as well. However, just like negative events may occur with many companies that handle food the advocate needs to take into account the other side of the spectrum. Other food service providers like Sodexo have successfully and safely provided prisoners with safe food throughout the years. So the advocate goes on and talks about certain instances that have hindered the health of inmates in private jails. According to a study created by Blakely and Curtis, inmates in private jails were more willing to be part of drug treatment programs as opposed to public jails. Although the advocate gives good examples of situations that did occur in several jails, like Arizona's prison death rate and increasing from 2011 to 2013, he doesn't provide a fair statement on how both private and public jails are succeeding in providing their inmates proper health care. To conclude my refutation speech, the advocate granted plenty of valuable information that does support his major claim. However, not enough data, statistics, and backup was given to keep his claim strong and standing. More research is to be granted by the advocate to give his major claim and supporting claims to keep him standing.
All right, well, the structural things are fine. I think that's okay. I did find several times in the presentation that it sounded more like you were doing a critique of the argument rather than a refutation of the argument. The idea that, well, he didn't present any evidence that was convincing enough on this. He had this information, and that might reach this conclusion, but it's not, very strong. And it would have been stronger if he'd had this, that, and the other thing. That's not the position that you want to take. You want to say, he's failed to prove the point. The evidence is inadequate to prove that particular point. And here's some information that suggests that it's not possible to prove that point because we have these counterclaims that are going on. So there's inconsistency on that, because there are times when you do present those counter kinds of arguments and suggest that there is information that suggests an opposite conclusion. For instance, you had all that data about the amount of time they spend in the private prisons versus the public prisons. I thought that was pretty substantial. You had information about, at the end, their willingness to participate in drug rehab programs and that sort of thing. So sometimes you are making the counterclaim. And then you kind of turn around and say, he made this argument and, we're back to the same sort of thing. Instead of denying it, you're barely even diminishing it. You're mostly suggesting that here's room for improvement and here's where you could improve on that. And that just felt a little underwhelming. There's a lot of things, though, that you do present that I thought worked pretty well. the explanation about why the prisons are exploding. You deny the claim that it's, private companies are trying to create systems where recidivism is likely, and instead you've got a good counterclaim there that says it's all these other kinds of things. And so I thought that worked pretty well. A little long.
Yeah, I know.
A little long.
It was hard to put it.
All right.
It was long before, just so you know.